James had always been drawn to the peace of nature and the quiet charm of small towns. After beginning his career in photography, he dedicated his life to travel and the discovery of new places. However, in recent months, a void had formed in his life. The hustle and bustle of big cities and the monotony of daily life bored him. He longed for tranquility, and after some searching, he found the perfect retreat, an old mansion in the small town of Londonderry, Vermont. Londonderry was a quaint village with an ancient feel. The history and natural beauty of the area intrigued James, and the mansion itself was equally mystifying. Local legends spoke of strange occurrences within its walls, with previous owners disappearing mysteriously. Locals called it the haunted house, but these stories only piqued James's interest further. The current owner, an elderly woman, handed James the keys with a cryptic warning: "Stay away from the mirror room on the second floor. Strange things have happened there. Some say they see something off in their reflection." But, of course, legends are just legends, aren't they? She smiled mysteriously, leaving James slightly unsettled, but he brushed it off. The house was built in the 1800s, with creaky wooden floors and damp marks on the walls. Every step James took seemed to echo throughout the old halls, giving him the eerie feeling of being followed. But for someone seeking peace, the atmosphere was perfect. He began exploring the second floor, where he stumbled upon a large room with a grand, ornate mirror. Its bronze frame was intricately designed, and the mirror itself seemed like it had witnessed decades of history. Standing before it, James felt an odd chill. The mirror was ancient, and for a moment, it seemed as though it was hiding something. He dismissed the thought, but something about it unsettled him. That night, as James lay in bed, listening to the quiet sounds of the Vermont countryside, he began to hear faint footsteps upstairs. At first, he thought it was just the old house settling, but the steps grew louder and more distinct, as though someone was walking around. He got up and followed the sound to the mirror room. The door creaked open slowly, and he stared into the mirror. His reflection looked back at him, but something was wrong. The figure in the mirror looked like him, but the eyes were hollow, and the expression was unfamiliar. It was him, but it wasn't. James felt as though the mirror was trying to pull him in. Shaken, he left the room, but the unsettling feeling remained with him. Each time he closed his eyes, he could see the strange reflection. Even in the daylight, as he tried to capture the beauty of the landscape with his camera, his mind kept returning to the mirror. Eventually, curiosity got the better of him. He returned to the room, determined to confront whatever was happening. As he stood before the mirror again, the room began to cool, and an eerie sound filled the air. He glanced around, but no one was there. His eyes turned back to the mirror, and this time, the reflection was no longer just him. The room in the mirror had become foggy and distorted, like a different version of the space he was in. As he reached out to touch the mirror, his fingers passed through the glass. Without understanding how, James was pulled into the reflection. Now, he found himself in a distorted version of the mansion, where everything was dimmer, older, and eerily quiet. He wandered through this strange version of the house, feeling the oppressive weight of someone or something watching him. In the corner of the room, a shadow began to form, taking shape. It was his reflection, but it was alive, moving independently. James realized with horror that he was now trapped in the mirror's world. and his reflection had taken his place. The reflection spoke in a voice that chilled James to the bone. "I am the shadow you've always hidden, the part of you that never fades. Now you are here, in my world." No matter how hard he tried to escape, James remained trapped in the world behind the mirror. The mirror, it seemed, was a gateway between two worlds, one of light and one of shadow. And now, James was imprisoned in the shadows. Deep in the heart of the British countryside, nestled among the rolling hills of Northumberland, stood St. Bartholomew's Church. It had weathered centuries of change, a structure as old as time itself. The church was far removed from modern life, tucked away in a forgotten corner of the world, where the wind howled through ancient trees and fog frequently blanketed the land like a ghostly shroud. Villagers rarely visited the church, except for holidays, and even then, they left quickly, avoiding the long, empty corridors and dark corners where the light barely reached. Thomas was a historian from London who specialized in ancient British architecture. He had heard stories about St. Bartholomew's, rumors of hidden chambers, unmarked graves, and strange occurrences. His fascination with the past led him to this ancient church. The villagers had warned him against staying too long, but Thomas was not the superstitious type. He dismissed their tales of hauntings as old wives' stories meant to deter outsiders. As Thomas arrived, the church loomed before him, a giant out of the mist. Its stone walls were dark with age, and the towering spire seemed to pierce the sky. The air around the church was thick and cold, though it was midsummer. He pushed open the heavy wooden doors and stepped inside. The interior of St. Bartholomew's was as imposing as its exterior. High, vaulted ceilings rose above him, and shafts of weak sunlight filtered through stained glass windows, casting eerie colors on the stone floor. The smell of damp stone and incense hung in the air. As he wandered deeper into the church, Thomas noticed how silent it was. No birds sang outside. No wind howled through the cracks. It was as if the world outside had ceased to exist. The main hall led to a smaller, more secluded chapel at the back of the church. It was here that Thomas found something peculiar, a door, barely visible behind an old tapestry. It was small and hidden, as though someone had wanted to conceal it long ago. The door was locked, but years of disuse had weakened the wood, and with a little effort, Thomas managed to force it open. Beyond the door was a narrow stone staircase spiraling downward into darkness. It was colder here, and the air felt heavy. Thomas hesitated for a moment, but curiosity pushed him forward. He descended slowly, the sound of his footsteps echoing in the tight space. At the bottom of the stairs, he found a forgotten crypt. The crypt was vast, stretching far beneath the church. Dust covered everything, and the walls were lined with tombs, their inscriptions too worn to read. But there was something unsettling about this place. A presence, almost palpable, lingered in the air. Thomas felt as though he was being watched. He raised his flashlight and scanned the room. His breath caught when the beam of light revealed an altar in the center of the crypt, surrounded by strange symbols carved into the floor. The markings were ancient, unlike anything Thomas had seen before, and they radiated a dark energy. His hands trembled slightly as he knelt to examine them closer. As he reached out to touch one of the symbols, a cold breeze swept through the crypt, even though there were no openings or windows. The candles he had lit earlier flickered and went out, plunging him into darkness. A deep sense of dread filled him, But before he could move, a soft whisper echoed through the crypt. It was indistinct at first, like the murmuring of wind through trees, but it grew louder, more insistent. Words that he couldn't understand filled the air, coming from all directions. The darkness around him seemed to shift, and out of the corner of his eye, he thought he saw shadows moving. Thomas stood quickly, heart pounding, and backed away from the altar. But as he did, he felt something brush against his arm, cold, like ice. He swung his flashlight wildly, but there was nothing there. Yet the whispers continued, growing louder, filling his head. His chest tightened as the air seemed to thin, making it hard to breathe. Panicking, Thomas ran for the stairs. As he ascended, the whispers turned into voices, angry, desperate voices that surrounded him, pleading, warning. He could feel a presence following him, something ancient and malevolent. When he reached the top of the stairs, he slammed the door behind him and fell to his knees, gasping for breath. But the church was not silent anymore. The voices were still there, faint but persistent, echoing through the stone walls. The shadows that had seemed harmless in the daylight now loomed larger, more menacing. Thomas backed away from the chapel, his eyes darting to the windows, where the once colourful light had dimmed to an ominous grey. The whole atmosphere had changed, as though the church itself was alive and angry at him for disturbing its secrets. He raced toward the front doors, but they wouldn't budge. They had been heavy before, but now they felt as though something was holding them shut. Panic surged through him. He was trapped. Desperate, he turned to face the church, but what he saw made his blood run cold. Figures were emerging from the shadows, not solid, but faint, like outlines of people that had long since left this world. They moved slowly, their faces obscured by darkness. One by one, they turned their heads toward him, as though sensing his fear. And then, from the back of the church, a figure stepped forward, taller, more defined than the others. It wore a hooded cloak, its face completely hidden, but there was something about it that felt wrong. It pointed a bony finger toward Thomas, and the voices suddenly stopped, replaced by a deafening silence. The figure began to move toward him, gliding over the stone floor, its cloak barely brushing the ground. Thomas backed up against the door, heart racing, his mind screaming for a way out. The figure stopped a few feet from him, and slowly, it raised its hand. In that moment, Thomas felt an unbearable coldness seep into his bones. His vision blurred, and the church around him began to fade. He could feel his body growing weaker, as though something was pulling his very life away from him. As he sank to the ground, barely conscious, the last thing he saw was the hooded figure leaning over him, and from beneath the hood, a whisper so soft it was barely audible, "You should have never come."